Hi, welcome. Welcome this afternoon to the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. I'm Natalie Swachina, our Associate Deputy Director here at the Craft Center. Thank you for coming out on this very humid day to join us. We're so excited to talk to two of our residents today. Katie, who will be here 9 months and will be here till the end of August, and Malene, who will be here till the end of this month. So very exciting. We're going to start off with Katie, Katie Mongoven. Oh my God, I'm saying it right. Just Mongoven. No, wait, now I'm really butchering it.
That sounded right.
Okay, thank you. I added an R in my head for all this time, and so I just realized the R is not supposed to be there. Katie is a Chinese-American fiber artist from Washington, D.C., based in Detroit, Michigan. Using thread, hair, beads, and found ceramics, she examines the themes of identity, ornamentation, body autonomy as they interact with the Asian American dysphoria, viewed through the lens of an orphan and adoptee from China's one policy error. She received a BFA from the University of Michigan and an MFA in fiber from Cranbrook Academy of Art, along with the Surface Design Association's Outstanding Student Award. She was a Roman J. Witt visiting artist at the University of Michigan, a Wingate Fellow at the Airmont School of Arts and Crafts, and the Barstow Artist in Residence at Central Michigan University. Other residencies she's attended include the California Institute of the Arts and the University of Michigan, and with a forthcoming residency at Stoveworks. Solo and group exhibitions include the University of Michigan, Playground Detroit, Rife Gallery, and Roy G. Biv Gallery in Ohio. I'm going to turn it over to Katie now.
Is this the mic?
It's the mic. Okay. You can just stay in this area.
Okay, yes. Hello. Okay, so my name's Katie, and we're just going to dive right in. And I like to, in this presentation, there's a lot of quotes. I'm just going to read them out because research and reading is a really large part of my practice. So I'll start off with this quote, which is, "Surfaces have stories to tell, including the route they've traveled from afar, the bodies they conserve over time, and the mysterious science of their construction." My notes is like really small. Okay, there. Okay, so for a little background about my practice, I was born in China in 1995, which was pretty much in the middle of the one-child policy. And if you're unfamiliar with that policy or you need a refresher, it was enacted and enforced by the CCP in China beginning in around 1980 and ending in 2016. And it limited families to one child as a way to preemptively curb a population surge in an attempt to avoid possible negative economic and social ramifications. And so this policy led to abandonment of children, forced sterilizations, birth control, abortions, and infanticide. Families could pay for additional children, but this policy disproportionately affected families with fewer financial resources, similar to how we've seen these restrictions affect families here in the United States. And so during the policy's imposition, foreign families adopted approximately 120,000 Chinese children, predominantly girls. And so through various fiber mediums, I am interested in crafting identity reconstruction after loss and displacement. And I think this exploration occurs in what critical theorist Homi Bhabha refers to as the third space, which I see as this evolving swirl of interaction, negotiation, and contradiction that exists between multiple cultures. Well, my mouse, there we go. So I kind of see my practice existing here. And so my current work, the work that I'm doing here at the Craft Center, really came after I read Ornamentalism by Anne Enlin Chang, who's a professor at Princeton, and she writes that ornament is flesh for Asian American female personhood. And how I interpreted that was clothing and ornamentation worn by Asian women merge with their flesh, signifying race and identity as equally as their skin color. And so I see the blue and white vessel as analogous to the Asian American objectified body, its racialized ornamental surface, and its capacity to carry life. And so I'm really drawn to blue and white ceramics specifically I'm interested in the binary nature of the cobalt glaze on the white porcelain. In addition, the fact that it's so ubiquitous, it's mass-produced, it's made in China, but crafted for Western consumption, I also see as kind of analogous to my own life story as well. And so I started this work when I was an artist in residence at Central Michigan University in the fall of 2024. And this was just part of my studio. It was in the woods. It was like one of the nicest, most like peaceful studios I've ever had. And so this was some of the work that I was messing around with at the time, and I use thread in my hair to sew glass seed beads around vases that I'm sourcing. So in this one, I'm using my hair instead of thread. And then this one, I've used this like paper tube to start building off of the vase. So another inspirational reading that I read a couple years ago was For Opacity by Edward Glissant, who writes that opacities can coexist and converge, weaving fabrics. To understand these truly, one must focus on the texture of the weave and not on the nature of its components. For the time being, perhaps, give up this old obsession with discovering what lies at the bottom of natures. And so I'm really interested in the interaction of the glass beads with the glaze patterns, this like pixelation and distortion that really blurs that binary, and covering the very racialized surface of these vessels in this like second skin of glass and fiber is a way for me to reclaim, recontextualize, repurpose, and protect these vessels that I see as, in some ways, my own body. And so I'm sourcing these vases mainly off eBay, but I also like really, if I see one in a thrift store, but it's really important that these are secondhand. I see that as also, in some ways, a performance of finding them, and then also as analogous to adoption. And then I'm also specifically looking for bud vases due to the bud vase's limitation of only being able to hold one flower at a time. And this is, I actually just finished this work, so this one's in my studio right now, if anyone wants to see it after the talk. Maybe, I don't know. And so going back to the one-child policy, it really violated bodily autonomy and reproductive rights, similar to the current threats that we face in the United States today. And just some like background, I guess, is that mostly girls were adopted between 1992 and 2024, which is when international adoption was open. And this peaked in the late 90s and early 2000s. So the majority of that population are people who are seeking birth control or thinking about family planning, and who are in their 20s and 30s when this is particularly relevant. So for me at least, and for other people that I've talked to, it kind of feels like our lives have been really bookended by these threats, where it's how our lives started, and it's kind of like what another threat we're facing today, but on the other side of the globe. So I think a lot about birth as well in my work. And so I made this work called Cord, which is roughly the length of an umbilical cord. And I was thinking about this like intimate and very physical bond between mother and fetus during pregnancy, and the nutrients and oxygen that are passed through the umbilical cord. And while this lifeline only lasts less than a year, and upon birth it's physically severed, I was thinking about, is this the end of that relationship, or do the foods, that our mothers ate for us still linger on our palate somewhere? And something I wanted to bring to your attention is this stamp on the bottom of this vase. And so when I was sourcing these vases, I started seeing this stamp on a few pieces, and it kind of piqued my interest. And I looked it up, and they all originated from this ceramics workshop in Liling, China, which is like 2 hours from where I was born. So it felt really like faded in some ways. And I started sourcing more and more, and so I actually found like these are all from the same mold. They all have like very similar glaze pattern. It's not identical. I think they were mostly done by hand or with stamps of some sort. But these are all from like the 1950s, and so I started collecting more and then seeking ones out that were of the same like family, and I started calling them sister vases. And so I was finding these vases like from all over the world. Like some of them were from Australia, Lithuania, the UK, also from the United States as well. So it felt really kind of just crazy to be bringing them all back together after like 70 years apart. And this was one of my collection at the time in my studio. And these were actually the first two vases that I had found where I was like, oh my gosh, this is the same like pattern. And so I wanted to make something that talked about their relationship. So I called these two sisters. And so this one has like short hair, and then this one has long hair. And I was just imagining they're like similar, but they have different hairstyles. But then I wanted to like kind of build on that a bit more and how get these like sister vases to interact with each other, and using the beads in a more sculptural way. And so it started, I was using my like paper tube again, and then connected them. And I kind of imagined that they're in this like closed off conversation with one another. We can't hear what they're saying. And then in this one, Ghost, I was interested in imagining and emphasizing the distance between these vases, and so you can actually like feel the space between them instead. And then I also, as I showed like a couple slides ago with my hair, I use my hair a lot in my work, and I'm really interested in hair, partially as DNA, partially and mostly because it is a record keeper of what we eat, our stress levels, the medications we're taking. It all shows up in the texture and color of our hair. So this is just me messing around with my hair in my studio. And I don't shave it, I don't pull it out or anything. It's whatever comes out during washing or brushing, during these like rituals of care and upkeep. It feels kind of poetic to just use whatever's going to come out naturally. So I started using my hair instead of thread to actually like bind the beads around the vases. And with bristle, I was imagining bristle as like a bristle brush, like bristle like hair, but then also bristle as a defensive reaction. And I started really seeing these vases almost like I started personifying them when I started using my hair. And then this one, you can't really see because it's a white background, but there are two white hairs in there, and it's possibly more obvious in person. But I was like kind of freaking out at one point with these because I was like, oh my gosh, like I started seeing like my hair was getting whiter, and it's like it's still not like crazy obvious yet, but I was trying to use my hair in my work, use the white hairs as a way to talk about change, and also kind of embrace it and be more of like a novelty thing when I find a white hair in the hair that I've lost versus like panicking that I'm getting older. It's fine now, but I was like panicking initially. And this is some other work. And so all of these have kind of like taken on their own personalities, and how I use the hair is just kind of like what I feel more like the vase shape warrants, and it's a little intuitive too. And then some newer body of work that I've really been focusing in on while I've been here was inspired by this book that I had read last summer called Unassimilable by Bianca Mabutlui, who's actually, I think she has her PhD in sociology now from Rice, like as of today. But she writes in this book, throughout history and more recently, laboring to prove our citizenship and belonging does not secure our safety in this country. Asserting our Americanness does not actually protect, save, or legitimate us. And so what she talks about in this book, and then building off of other research that I had read where Asian Americans are seen as perpetual foreigners got me thinking a lot about belonging, culture, citizenship, assimilation. And so I started using red thread in place of hair and blue thread to introduce the palette of red, white, and blue into my work. And so I grew up in Washington, D.C., which is very, it was a very patriotic place. And this new body of work is inspired by the phrase, "I bleed red, white, and blue," which is a declaration of patriotism and loyalty to the United States. And so by using red thread, the vase assumes the aesthetic of traditional Americana, being red, white, and blue. And I started working on a larger scale when I was at Stoveworks in Chattanooga last September. And so this piece is 17 inches, I don't know. There's a similar one in my studio right now. But even though it's red, white, and blue, its Oriental origins remain evident. The white of the porcelain takes on this pink fleshy tone, and the threads, I'm imagining the way that they're sewn through the clear seed beads, they kind of course like blood within vessels. Oh, this is the video, here we go. And so when you're looking into the opening of the vase, the clear seed beads transition to all red seed beads, emphasizing this alternate intimate space or orifice. And so this body of work, I'm questioning what it means to be Chinese American, what sacrifices must be made to belong here, and whether we want to belong at all. Last quote. I reread Ornamentalism a couple weeks ago, and I stumbled upon this when I was rereading it, and I was like, I didn't catch this the first time. But I was like, it's just so crazy. So I'm interested in thinking about the yellow woman as a comparable form of interstitial life, but an intimate relation more to objects than to animal life, and with a body that is not so much disaggregated as thickly encrusted. What? Anyways, thank you so much. I have a exhibition opening on June 16th at the Mary Madison Parish Art Gallery up in the Woodlands, if you're in the area. And I will be giving a similar artist talk on June 17th at 1 o'clock there.
Does anyone have any questions?
I forgot.
Any questions?
Sure, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
With the beads, I didn't hear, is there any source that you go for the beads, with the seed beads? Does that have impact on your work?
I'm using seed beads, and I believe they're made in China. Something that's kind of important is that all of the materials that I'm using have some sort of link to my life. So cotton is one of the main exports from where I was born. My hair and then the ceramics I'm using are also from the same region in China. The beads I have less control over, but they're also made in China.
Thank you.
So have you been to China since you?
Nope,
No
not
plan-
yet.
No plans?
Nothing in the immediate future, but I would like to, maybe.
You didn't speak at all, or didn't mention, I don't think, about hair being such as, identifying factor for Asian women.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't really, it's so ubiquitous, and, people talk about it all the time, but is it a conscious thing as part of the practice? Or?
I think so. I think in some ways it is, using my hair feels in a lot of ways like self-love, like a celebration. Growing up, in the early 2000s, it was a thing to be blonde. And so you would rarely see people with long black hair on TV or in magazines. So to use it now, it does feel like it's something that I like very much cherish and value about myself.
I have a question. How does beading with your hair as a material is compared to the thread? Like, is it a challenge using your own hair, or does it work in a similar? Does it feel like in a similar way as thread? Like, what is it like to work with it?
It's sometimes it's easier than using thread. Like, it doesn't tangle, at least mine doesn't, and it's like hair can be so durable that it's like you can like pull at it and it won't necessarily. It's not as fragile, I guess, as I would assume it would be.
Do you keep planning on working big? Like a lot of what you were showing us with the small faces, but now you started working with larger sizes. What made you transform to the larger sizes?
I think I wanted to see the difference in scale with like the beads, the way they're like size 11, and then when you're working on a vase that is such a small surface area before it starts to curve back, you don't really see as much of that pixelation as you would on like a larger scale. And so I was really interested in like that visual effect.
I was interested in the way you were styling the hair. There was earlier you were talking about how working with your hair anthropomorphized your vessels to you somewhat, and then the one with that sort of almost ponytail. I just am curious about like the styling, how far you think you want to take it, because there was something, humorous almost about that, and I think that could be an interesting direction. I just want to know more about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think like a lot of it is like the vase shape is kind of what informs what the hair is going to do. And I also feel like a lot of it is kind of what I do to my own hair. Like I do a lot of braids or just ponytails. But yeah, it's such a new thing still that I'm like still experimenting. Oh yeah.
I don't know if this is just a question or I was just thinking about how you mentioned DNA and like our hair holds all of this information, and I feel like it's you make these really beautiful special pieces that you're sharing with us, and how that feels as the maker to be kind of releasing like something really personal and intimate, even if we don't necessarily see it that way, but just that sense that you're kind of giving that to us, and how that feels for you as an artist and a maker, and knowing your stuff is out in the world.
Yeah. I think it's like I think the quote from for opacity is really important in that regard. Like I'm happy to share as much as I want to share, but then some things I think are meant to be kept private, and yeah, and so I'm happy to, because I think some of the things that I talk about, or at least I hope they are like kind of relevant to what's going on, so I do feel like it's important to talk about these things, and I'm happy to bring my own life into it, but then other things I'm also like, I don't want to rehash this again.
Yeah,
this is my own like thing, but yeah.
How long does it take to complete the beadwork on the vases?
It depends, and I've really stopped tracking how long it takes, but it really depends on the size. But yeah, it's hard to tell after a certain point.
Well, thank you so much, Katie. And one fun part of having Katie in residence is her nails are really amazing, and she's been doing them herself, so it's really fun to see every time. Okay, sorry, I have to remember how to get back to this, so y'all just bear with me for a second. What did I do? Marlisa, do you know what I just did? Oh, wait, no, maybe. Nothing makes me feel as old as having technical problems, and
Did you have it open in a different window?
I have it. I got it now. Thank you, though. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, I impressed myself with that in front of all of y'all. So thank you so much. So next up is Malene Djenaba Barnett, who's an award-winning multidisciplinary artist, textile surface designer, and community builder. In her work, she explores both her Caribbean heritage and surface pattern design found in African and diasporic architecture, textiles, and objects. From art and design to research, writing, and public speaking, she works to empower and unite Black artists and designers through community building. Her incised ceramic vessels and architectural installations, woven portraits, and photo-based collages have been exhibited at galleries and museums throughout the United States, including the Museum of African Diaspora in San Francisco, Kensington Biennial at the National Gallery of Jamaica, African American Art Museum of Dallas, Mindy Solom Gallery in Miami, the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, Sugar Hill Museum in New York, and Temple Contemporary in Philadelphia. Her art and design work has been featured in magazines including the New York Times, Gallery, Elle Decor, Architectural Digest, Departures, Interior Design, and on Room to Inspire on the Magnolia Network. She holds an MFA in ceramics from the Tyler School of Art and Architecture, undergraduate degrees in fashion illustration and textile surface design from the Fashion Institute of Technology, and was awarded a Fulbright in 2022 to research African Jamaican ceramic traditions as a visiting artist at the Edna Malene College in Kensington, Jamaica. Her works are in private and public collections, including the Los Angeles County Museum and the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I'm going to turn it over to Malene now.
No, so I could just press the arrow? I just want to make sure.
Arrows.
Oh, okay, I see. Now I see why you're peeking. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. Before I begin any presentation, I always like to give thanks to the ancestors. So I like to read. I would like to express my gratitude to the ancestors, the Garifuna of St. Vincent and the Maroons of Jamaica. The unwavering determination of these communities to pursue Black liberation serves as a cornerstone for my studio practice, which aims to reimagine Black archives and futures through the creative works of Black women makers. It is worth noting that the Garifuna and the Maroons bravely fought against the British during the colonial era, and as descendants of these communities, their legacy is deeply ingrained in my identity. So, I am Malene Djenaba Barnett. I am a multidisciplinary artist, a textile surface designer, community builder, a Fulbrighter, and I'm also the author of a book called Crafted Kinship, which goes inside the creative practices of contemporary Black Caribbean makers. So I grew up in a very small town in Norwalk, Connecticut, and many people have asked since I've been here, like, what made you become an artist? And my answer is always, I've always been an artist. I've been painting and drawing ever since I was 8 years old, and I was selected for an artistically talented program where we had to draw and paint. But what I realized as I got older, that my art teacher during this time, we're talking the 70s, because I am a 72 baby, that my teacher only allowed us to mix colors that represented white people's skin. And so all of my paintings during that time reflected that. And so this photograph was taken when I was in the 10th grade. And I was able to take agency over my art, and I only painted self-portraits since then. And my teacher at the time, who may her soul rest in peace, she taught us the importance of documenting our work and painting based on who we are and where we wanted to go. And the portrait I'm painting was actually based on my first trip to Barbados. So I want to share that my work has always been reflective of my Black identity. So it was inspired by Black women who painted in non-Western ways. I always focused on West African textiles, objects, and architecture. And I'm always thinking about how home and how to reclaim home, being a Black diasporan, looking at ancestral practices, and these are just some of the books that ignited my interest and my curiosity to go deeper into my heritage. And so I have a career where I've been designing for the past 30 years. and I decided to focus on rugs. And these are just some examples of some of my very first rug designs under my namesake label, Malene B, where I was working with weavers in Nepal, India, and China, and I was using all of my travels from around the world to create one-of-a-kind works of art for the floor. Now, mind you, this is in 2010 when I officially, I launched the business in 2009, but it was around 2010 when I really started to go to trade shows and share the work. And so you can only imagine during that time, the market had just crashed. It was very challenging to sell work based on my life experience and with a global perspective. Those are actually my hands when I went to one of my besties' wedding in India, and actually my mother's friend in Senegal, who in Kaolack, Senegal. And then I was always inspired by the Aboriginal dream paintings. And so during that time, I had to switch up the way I would make rugs. And these are just some of the projects where I designed rugs for commercial spaces, residential, and hospitality environments. And they were all one-of-a-kind designs. But what happened was I did that for about 10 years, and I realized I was getting burnt out, and I felt my voice was being suffocated. And so what happened was in 2017, I got a big project designing all the rugs for a Moxie, which is a Marriott brand hotel, and I decided to take a sabbatical from my business. And during that time, I hired a business coach, and she looked at my work, and I told her name is Jasmine, and I said, Jasmine, I don't want to do this anymore. And she looked at my work, and she said, Malene, you're an artist. And I said, I paid you to tell me what I know? And so she's like, and then she says, no, I'm serious. You're an artist. You need to go back to making with your hands. And so that brought me on a journey to explore a new medium. I said, you know what? I was interested in clay. And like many people who are interested in clay, they take a class at their local pottery studio, and that's exactly what I did. In addition, I also was I went back to my first art history class, which was African American art history, during my first year of college, which was in 1990. And it was Edmonia Lewis, Augusta Savage, and Elizabeth Catlett. I started to go back and study their journeys. And I wanted to see how they navigated their art practice. And so that also led me to Edmonia Lewis, who had went to Pietrasanta, Italy. I went there to study figure sculpting. And when I came back, I had this residency at Greenwich House Pottery, where I decided to focus the 3 months of exploring what it is that I really was drawn to was mud architecture, textiles, and objects. And so these are some of the very first objects that I made during that time. This was called Abuja, this piece, and it's representing the Hausa architecture found in Nigeria, which is a very sculptural architecture. And by the way, the slide before, which is the Kasena, and the piece is actually called Kasena as well. And it's the women who actually do the surface design and the men build the houses. And then I was looking at the Zulu beer pots from the Zulus in South Africa. And so as you could see, I was constantly looking at heritage from different perspectives and reimagining it as a Black diasporan. And then I started to make vessels. This series was called Redemption. I was actually looking at the Adira textiles from Nigeria, which is a indigo dyed cassava paste resist textile, and gele head wraps. And these were the combination of some of those interests. And so traveling and engaging in community are also central to my creative practice. I do a lot of traveling, and it's very important for me to go and visit the communities that are actually making the work that I'm interested in. So in 1995, which is a very pivotal year for me, this was my first trip to Ghana. And as you could see on the right, I was engaged in a cultural exchange program where I was in Ghana for 3 weeks. I stayed with a family. We were learning the language, the arts. It was interesting. I wasn't interested in pottery then, but I noticed in my pictures I was making images of the potters, of the wood carvers, and the weavers. And by the way, I was not good at wood carving. I learned that from that trip. So I said, I'll stay away. I'm good. I have much respect for all the wood carvers. But I saw, how art, design, and culture was incorporated in all aspects of life. And then fast forward, 2019, I had the opportunity to travel back to Ghana with Winnie Owens Hart, a renowned ceramic artist, to Denu, Ghana, which is actually on the border of Ghana and Togo. So we actually were able to walk over to Togo for the day. That's how close the city was. But I was working alongside the women in Kuli and learning about their technique of building pots, which is very unique. That's me right here, and that's Winnie learning their technique. And these are the Kuli potters, where their process of pottery starts with the top of the form versus the bottom. And so what it is on the ground is actually the pots that were the tops. And then as you could see in the middle photo, she's pushing through the pot to create the shape. And so this practice was repeated on a weekly basis, daily basis, and it really taught me the importance of patience and then working with very few materials, and it was pretty amazing what they were able to make. And it was strictly the women who make these pots. And so in 2020, I had the brilliant idea of going back to school, to grad school, after being out of college for 25 years. I enrolled to do my MFA at Tyler School of Art and Architecture. And before I had went to school, I had taken my DNA test, and I wanted to know more about who I am, where my people came from, even though it may not have been 100%, but I wanted to use it as a roadmap for how I was going to continue to build my journey. In addition, I also took this 2 years during grad school to unravel the romantic relationship I had with the Caribbean. So now the top picture is my grandmother, who we called Mom. She migrated to the U.S. from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a tiny island in the Eastern Caribbean. And the photo below her is a photograph of my mother and her siblings and my great-grandmother, where they would get dressed up in their school uniforms and they would take this picture and send it to their mother, who was already in New York. She had already migrated in the 50s and left all her children. This is a typical Caribbean migration story. And so it took about 9 years until she was reunited with all of her children. And my mother is the oldest, and she's the one with the glasses. That's my mother at around age 12. It's the only photograph that I have as them at that age, and so I constantly revisit it in my practice. And so my father, he is from Jamaica, so that's where you see the combination of these two islands. And if you look at the list from the DNA, I started to go through the countries, and so I'm on a mission to visit and explore and reclaim the spaces through my DNA, through the art, architecture, and objects. And so when having this information, I started to ask myself a series of questions. What does it mean to have a mother from St. Vincent and a father from Jamaica, the first and last Caribbean islands to be colonized? Further, what does it mean to be a person of the Black diaspora? What is the Black experience for first-generation Caribbean immigrants? And what if colonization didn't happen? So these questions started to inform how I started to make. In 2022, upon graduation from Tyler, I was awarded a Fulbright, and I was focused on learning about African Jamaican pottery. The reason why was because during grad school, I realized that when we talk about ceramics as a global medium, the lack of information in the archives around the Caribbean were pretty much it was pretty fragmented. It was just a few fragments. There were 2 books that I knew of that were written about Caribbean ceramics, and all the other documents were focused on archaeologists' point of view. And so I was determined to rewrite that from a maker's perspective. And so I spent 10 months in Jamaica, which is in Kingston, which is my father's birth city. And I was the visiting artist at Edna Manley College of Visual and Performing Arts. It's the only art school in the English-speaking Caribbean. And I interviewed and went around the entire island and learned about the people who were still focused on making pottery from the ancestral way, which is hand building. And so this is me with my crew, with Damien, Blessed, and Junior, who are part of a small community called Rosetown Potters. They are some of the few makers who are still working in the ancestral way of making pottery, hand building. Now, contemporary ceramics are on the island, but I was focused on the hand building. And so while I was there, I was really interested in trying to understand some of the iconic pots from Jamaica, which is called the yaba pot. Now, yaba pots, they're simple. Basically, they're similar to what is being made in this picture. They were kind of a large, wide bowl. And so I was interested in the origin of how this pot became Jamaica's iconic ceramic object. And so I went back and I found a paper talking about surface pattern design in Jamaican pottery. And it discussed about the pottery shards that were found after the earthquake in Port Royal. And for those who don't know, Port Royal was actually the first capital of Jamaica. But it had 2 earthquakes, and so the capital had to move inland, and so hence Kingston is the capital. But Port Royal was known for, it was a wealthy city because these are where the pirates and the buccaneers had settled, and then these were some of the first Africans that were brought to Jamaica. This is where they were. And these were a very skilled group of people. And so one of the skills was making pots. And so if you could imagine, so the first groups of people coming from, say, Ghana, Nigeria, what we know today, they were already master potters, and they were still making pots based on their homeland, and those were some of the fragments that were found on the shards. Because as time went on, the pots became simplified with no pattern. And so I used the map of the earthquake, because the arrow is pointing to what was left after the earthquake. So I used a map of Port Royal from before and after, and I started to create my own series of yaba pots. And I also I started to use different pattern design to pay homage to those who had left the marks to those fragments for me to able to find and make the connection to my history. And so the pattern design is really like a signifier of culture and heritage. And so this is just sharing like the process, of the tool that I was using, and then I would fill the dots with like a underglaze white it's called the inlay technique. And so I'm really interested in these repetitive mark making processes. Of course, while I'm making work, I'm constantly thinking about future, ancestor, and how I could leave my legacy and my mark on this world. And so these are some of the pots from that series. I actually worked with the local potters from Rosetown and other Jamaican potters to actually make the shapes for me, and then I did the surface decoration. And so also during that Fulbright, I also was interested in Malu. So this is a photograph of Malu. Malu was one of the renowned Jamaican potters who focused specifically on African Jamaican pottery techniques. She revived the hand building in the 50s. And so her pots were just so amazing that it looked like they were wheel thrown. And so the many people on the island, they weren't familiar with who were making the pots, but they were familiar with the yaba pot. And so my research was about trying to bring more awareness to her. She's no longer living. Her children are, but they're no longer making pots. And so I interviewed people who knew her, studied with her, or were friends with her. And the video that I'm going to play next is a renowned ceramic artist named Norma Rodney Herrick, who was actually one of her students. And so she Norma is holding one of Malu's pots, and she's pointing to these 4 dots. That's how Malu signed her pots. That's how you knew you had an original Malu pot. So this is Norma.
The most well-known one we have, she was really working in that mold, that exact mold. So she would sit on the ground with her clay, and she would use the coil makes it very rudimentary, a rudimentary way of doing it. She just grabbed a handful of coils and did her thing. And she was so spectacular, Malu. It was wonderful to watch her. When she was finished with her work of art, you could never tell that it was not thrown on the wheel. It was perfect, perfect. And then she would adapt the thyme and African mix decoration, and she would do that on her pot. She would also what she would call gilt her pot, to use a red iron mixture, which is a bauxite mixture. She would get this mixture from the back of her yard. It was running by, and she would get it and straight and use it. So she would paint it on her pot, and then she would burnish. So her pot was always nicely shiny and satiny looking. But then, of course, she did a wood firing. And so some of them would take on a soot from the smoke. Mm-hmm. So it would really be satisfying to look at one of her work, two-tone. Really lovely, really lovely.
And so my research continued in Nevis. I was in Nevis, St. Kitts and Nevis, which is another small island in the Eastern Caribbean, interviewing Elmina George, also known as Miss George, in the green, and Marilyn Evelyn, who are the last potters in Nevis. And so my research from the Fulbright has encouraged me to continue to build and archive the stories of the last potters in the Caribbean who are working in the hand building technique. And so I'll start to share, I'm going to go through some projects to share some of the work that I'm making now, and then I'll end with where I am today. And so this fragment, this tile, actually, I made in grad school, and when I fired it, it cracked just like this. But I didn't look at it as like a negative and go crazy. I actually took it upon myself and figured out a way to incorporate it into my work. And so I do see my work as like permanent fixtures in space. And so this is me at Haystack, where I was on an open studio residency, and it shows how I hand draw all of my patterns freehand in the same style as the surface pattern designers in my lineage, and then I actually cut the tiles intentionally because I thought about how being a Black diasporan, our history has been intentionally cut, but being a diasporan, we have the power to put it together. And so this is a piece that's actually in my home in Brooklyn, and it's called the Legacy Wall. And it consists of over 6,000 terracotta pieces fragmented to represent the legacy of the Black experience. The colors, the indigo and the cream and the are representative of the commodities that were used to enforce through the enforced labor of my people, the indigo and the sugar. And so I continue this work. This is another piece that I made when I was in Jamaica. This is in Jamaica. I was making tiles called Memories of Home, which is a ceramic installation. I was actually looking back at I'm using Sankofa, which is a Ghanaian word to mean you have to go back in order to move forward. And so this was about really connecting the Jamaica clay with Nigerian Yuli painters or Kasena painters, and creating a piece that kind of reminds you of home. No two pieces are alike, but it's this illusion that you'll see that the same patterns twice. This was actually at Design Miami with my gallery in Wexler. A few years ago, this was the exhibition. And then this piece, my mother had given me a piece of lace that I grew up with, a lace doily. And so I had no idea what I was going to do with it. And then I was on a residency in Georgia, and I started collecting lace doilies from southern thrift shops. And again, this was my way of thinking about this Pan-Africanist and connecting the diaspora through these making processes. And so I decided to start to embed the lace in the clay, and started to crinkle it up so it feels like fabric, to think about how how heavy our history is through these materials, but also thinking about domesticated spaces, on how this lace, yet it was brought over by the Europeans, we adapted it as icons and signifiers of what a beautiful home could look like. And so this was a commission at the Moad Museum in San Francisco. I don't even know how many lace doilies I made, but I made tons, and it's 33 feet long, this piece, and I had plenty of help, but it was a very intense project. And so then I'll bring you where I am now. So I've been thinking about language, especially in our political environment where the attempts of Black voices, culture, and experience are trying to be erased. And so I wanted to create a piece that reminded Black people and to also remind the world that no matter what oppressive systems are in place, that Black power can never be erased. And I went back to my DNA and I was thinking about language. And so I started to look at the Adinkra alphabet. And I was using the alphabet to create phrases of Black liberation. And so what I did was I carved each tile, and the phrase says Black power, and it's in repetition over and over again. And this is how the final piece looks. This is also at my gallery in Philadelphia at Wexler. It's the black clay, and the idea is that when you look at it, it's a constant reminder of how powerful you are. And the vessels on the bottom are from another series, Half and Half. But sorry, I mean, I know I'm over in time, so we could talk about that another time. And then this one is called Cuba Power. It also used the same alphabet. And when I started, I worked in 4 different clay bodies, but when I started to put it together, it started to feel like Cuba cloth. And Cuba cloth is a cloth from the Congo, and again, another signifier of power. And then most recently, I did my DNA through AfricanAncestry.com. And when it came back and confirmed that I was 100% from the Bubi people, Fulani, Hausa, and the Takar, it also reaffirmed the work that I've been doing has been from my DNA. There's no coincidence the work that I've been doing. And so this also helped to reaffirm and confirm what I've always thought. That's me on the right side, and that's a woman in Mali painting. And I see no difference between us. I went to Senegal back in 2018 to reclaim my heritage. When I was growing up, I had too many friends from Senegal and Mali tell me, you look Fula, you look Fulani. And so I started to embrace that as I got older. And then when I went back, it was a moment of reclaiming that. And so when I put the pictures together now, and having this DNA confirmation just shows I am making work from who I am. And so here at HCC, I should say HCCC, that's how people say it's better. I've been working on using contemporary alphabets from the Fula language, creating these phrases around Black liberation. And so I've been also experimenting with Narikomi techniques because I'm interested in how the clay can make the patterns themselves. And so these are just some of the tests of the Narikomi, as well as some of the Adinkra tiles the Fula tiles that I've been experimenting with. And I'm also in the process of interrogating Portuguese tile carpets, because again, Portugal was on my DNA, and it brought me down this line of curiosity of how come Portuguese is in my DNA. It was a small percentage, but then I had to realize the Portuguese started the Atlantic slave trade, yet the British perfected the system, but they also, they profited from the labor. And so these tile carpets and all the facades of buildings, when you go to Portugal, they were funded through the labor of my community. And so I want to go back and reclaim those works with my family story, with Black experiences, and with the fabrics that empower us. And so this is what I'm working on while I'm here. And so what I've been doing is I've been gathering family photographs, and I've been screen printing them on newsprint paper and creating underglaze transfers and transferring the images onto the clay. And then I've been writing messages on there. And this one right now, it says Dear Mom, because we called our grandmother Mom. And so the idea is that I want grandmothers to have a space, because I feel that they are the foundation of our families, and that yet they don't get the recognition that they do. And so the idea is that once it's like shown, is that to have this letter in the Fula language for people to write, what would they say to their grandmothers, whether they knew her or not, because I never had time with my grandmother. She died when she was 54, and I was only 11 months old. But my work is constantly channeling her, and so this is where I am right now, and I can't leave without plugging my book, Crafted Kinship, and that's where I am. Thank you. Oh, okay.
The Adinkra alphabet
Actually, it's a Dr. Charles, I can't think of Charles' last name. There's a book called The Adinkra Alphabet. He actually created it because Adinkra is actually a symbol. There was all these symbols, and I thought to myself, there has to be an alphabet. And so, of course, with my curiosity, I started Googling, and then I found someone who created the alphabet. But if you go to the Instagram, it's called Adinkra Alphabet, and you'll see the book and everything. Yeah. Question?
In the photograph of you working in Ghana, where they had the inverted pots, where they were starting at the top.
Yes.
One of the workers was utilizing a piece of wood. What
Yes.
was that?
The paddle.
I don't know. I couldn't.
Yeah,
see. What was it?
it's actually it's a paddle. They make them, and I actually have one in my studio because that actually is what helps to shape. That was what helps to shape the outside of the pot, right there, right?
That one. In the
Yeah,
back.
yeah. It's a paddle, so it's a wood
Okay.
paddle. So when you're shaping the pot to help to create the shape, because right now it's at this leather hard stage, so you could start to shape it so it's like perfectly round.
Cool. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Good question.
For these images that you show and the workers, all the clay is sourced locally in the ground, is that right?
Which clay? Which?
Well, the clay here, for example.
Oh yeah, that's all
like-
local. This is because this is in Ghana, so they have a space that they go to, and the men actually dig the clay for them and bring it to them.
Yeah. And, yeah.
And same in Jamaica.
Yeah.
The clay is so close. It's like where we are right now. Just go to like the end of the hall. That's where the clay is.
And so for you, where are you sourcing your clay?
Right now, I'm just using local clays, so sculpture clays from different distributors here in the U.S.
Right, but they don't have a special source necessarily.
No, they're making them here, so I'm just using the brands that because I use a lot of sculpture clay because I want that grit, and it holds the tiles better. So yeah, I'm like Laguna in California, Aardvark. These are the clays that I've been using.
Well,
Question?
I know
Yeah.
some of these tiles are for a public commission, right?
This that's right. I didn't include it. You see, I had so much. Yeah, I'm working on a public commission in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the center is called the Windsor Noco Chavis Community Complex. It's a new construction, and it's going to be finished being built in 2027. So I was commissioned to do a large-scale ceramic mural that represents the community, and so I had the community, I created a workshop, I should say, for the community to create their own alphabet. And so I'm using their alphabet to create words that represent them in a sculptural, and also incorporating archival images that represent the future, and then also to represent the ancestors through all the names that they would like to honor. Yeah.
I
Question?
have a question about the technique that you learned in the photo where you're learning from that other practitioner. You're both bent double at the waist.
That's right.
I'm curious to know what about that technique requires that body position, because it seems like it would be quite difficult.
But that's what they're doing. And so, because remember, there's no tables, there's no banding wheels, there's no equipment. And so the ground is the table. And so the dirt is actually keeping the clay in place too. And so I watched the women do it. And of course, for me not being in that position for a while, it's like, okay, I can't stay that long. But this is what they're doing day in and day out. And I have plenty of photos, which I don't have here, where they're just knocking it out. Because
Is it somehow easier, as opposed to squatting or sitting,
Yeah, well, see, because some people who are doing that sitting technique, they're using a shard to start the bottom of the bowl. Because they're starting the top, and the way they're doing it, throwing the clay on the dirt, and they're walking around, it's just easier to do it.
So they're sort of circling.
They're working around, yeah.
So it's kind of keeping it helps center, maybe?
Yeah, so the dirt is really acting as the banding wheel in a way. It's acting as the table. And so they are walking, you don't see it here, but you do walk around. And even the smoothing of the lid, it's a piece of fabric, they're walking around. And it's the same method like this in Jamaica, they called it a walk around pot. So there's all these connections because again, it's the same processes that were carried over. But yeah.
So those are the necks of the pot? the ring, like that's
Yeah.
that's a ring actually.
Yeah, so you
Yeah.
see, like these are all tops sitting there, right?
Yeah.
And so now you see that's what it looks like after they've smoothed it out and
Yeah.
they put on the iron oxide for the red, and it's drying on that last picture. And then the center, she's already picked up that piece and she's already pushing out to make the bottom. And then here they're finishing it, so it's gonna be perfect. And then they let those dry, and then they do a group firing. Question?
What's been the most memorable or surprising reaction to your work that you've experienced?
Oh. Let me think. I'm thinking there've been so many memorable moments, but when people go up to it, and it's one thing you see it on the screen here, and then for when you see it in person, because I work in such large scale, pictures really don't do it justice. But when people feel seen, especially Black people, I make my work for the Black community first and foremost, and I want us to feel like we belong, because we do, And the thing is, our idea of home comes in multiple spaces, and I really want the work to encourage us to understand that yes, this is home, the continent is home, the Caribbean home, all wherever we are represented is home, because we've always been forced to make it home. And so I feel that my purpose as an artist and as a maker is to constantly make work so that we're constantly reminded, because we know how effed up this world is. And so when I feel that people see, I feel seen, especially the Black community, I've done my job. I'm living on purpose, and that's what makes me feel proud. Yeah.
Any last questions from Malene?
Oh, okay.
What is the drying process for your tile work?
The drying process? Oh, I mean, it doesn't take, well, the funny thing is being here, because of the AC, the tiles dry really quickly. But in New York, because I'm based in New York, it takes a long time. So it's literally, you just gotta be patient and let it dry. And the thicker they are, the longer it takes to dry.
I think that's always one interesting thing about artists coming to a new climate is that you would expect Houston with our humidity, other things have taken longer.
Yeah.
But you're here in the summer with the AC. And
Yeah.
those things you don't always think about when you're making it a different climate.
That's right, that's right. That's right.
Well, thank you, Malene.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for coming this afternoon. Both Katie and Malene will have their studios open after, as well as our other residents, Kendall and Candace, who are also here. So please feel free to come in their studios and check out their work in person.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank y'all.